Exploration of the Pico de Orizaba Obsidian Mines. Chapter 3, In a Crystalline Geotic Web of Obsidian. Citlotepetl, Nahuatl for Pico de Orizaba, means Mountain of the Star. The name Citlaltepetl is not used by Nahuatl speakers of the Orizaba area, who instead call it Aztectepetl in the traditional orthography for classical Nahuatl, meaning White Mountain. The earliest mention of the volcano was referred to by the natives during the pre-Columbian era as Poyatacatl, which means the ground that reaches the clouds. Citlaltepetl was the common name in the Nahuatl language when the Spanish arrived in Mexico. Citlaltepetl comes from the Nahuatl Citiali, star, and tepetl, mountain, meaning Star Mountain. Star Mountain is thought to refer to the snow-covered peak that can be seen year-round for hundreds of kilometers around the region. A legend arises from the city of Coscametepec, which tells the story of how the planet Venus can be seen settling into the crater of Citlaltepetl. Venus as the morning star represents the Mesoamerican god Quetzalcoatl, while as the evening star it's associated with an aspect of the god Tezcatlipoca. Photographed, written, and podcast video produced, directed and programmed by Jack Lamb. Dr. Terry Stalker and Jack Lamb. Photograph taken in 1981 as we ascended the volcano, Pico de Orizaba, to explore, photograph and survey the lost Aztec mines. When Stalker arose, Jack had a pot of coffee ready and the campfire blazing. Presumably, Barbara must still be asleep in their tent, while Frank lay near the fire where he slept the night, wrapped in his own sleeping bag. "Morning, pass me a cup of that coffee," Stalker said, sitting down close to the fire for warmth. "Is there any of that veggie stew left from last night?" he queried. "Yes, there is," Jack replied, placing the pressure cooker on the coals to heat. "How's Barb? Is she still affected by altitude?" "Much better. She still has a throbbing headache, but she is no longer nauseous," Stalker replied, heartened. "So thankfully, her altitude sickness is finally behind her." "That's great," Jack answered, delighted she finally was on the road to recovery. Today we were eager to begin exploring the obsidian mines. So after a hurried breakfast, we assembled our gear and immediately left camp for the taluses. With Stalker carrying the camera case, and Jack carrying the ropes along with the climbing and caving gear, we crossed the taluses intent on exploring the 3 mines we located. But the eastern sky burned so rust-red before the dawn, it enticed us to take a detour to watch the sunrise from a nearby ledge on the east edge of the plateau at 13,800 feet elevation. Looking down from the precipice, a cosmic sea of bumpy and billowy stratocumulus clouds screened our view of the coastal jungles of the state of Veracruz and the Gulf of Mexico far below, clouds colored an iridescent rouge from the underglow of the rising sun. It was difficult to believe we stood at so lofty an elevation, yet sea level lay less than 3 miles below our feet. We did not return our attention to the obsidian mines until the sun rose above the clouds to recolor the billows in alluring gold. Since the talus No. 2 mine lay closest to our position, we decided to explore it first. Our anticipation of the moment when we would enter an obsidian mine had been building for days, and we were thrilled the time had finally arrived for us to descend into the earth to discover the secrets buried inside tunnels napped by pre-Columbian miners of past millennia. The first order of business was to rig a climbing rope for our descent. Wrapping a short piece of rope multiple times around a nearby tree selected as an anchor, Jack tied the ends together with a double granny knot. Then clipping a locking carabiner over the coils circling the tree, he fastened the end of the climbing rope to the carabiner with a bowline knot. Additionally, before entering the mine, Jack prepared the carbide lamps used to provide light in the Stygian darkness of the obsidian tunnels. Then, after mounting the lamps on miner helmets, he ignited both lamp flames before handing one to Stalker and donning the other. Although Aztec miners cut the shaft from sharp obsidian glass, they worked it smooth so there were no razor edges along the lip of the shaft to abrade the rope. Peculiarly, a log, or rather the upper part of a tree, leaned against the shaft wall below, extending to within 6 feet of the lip of the pit. Jack backed over the edge until he leaned clear of the lip, then allowed his weight to pull the rope taut before rappelling into the shaft. Immediately he realized the nubs of the branches spiking the log provided a ladder of sorts, and grasped he could walk down it as he rappelled. On reaching the bottom of the shaft, he noticed the pine needles and organic matter covering the sloping mine floor, supported tufts of grass and moss apparently able to survive in the meager light entering the entrance when the sun passed overhead at a certain time of day. It took Stalker but a minute to clip into the rope and lower himself over the lip of the shaft. After dropping 6 feet, he stopped to examine the log before stating in disbelief. "This ain't no log. It's an Aztec ladder." Keenly interested, we examined the artifact. The Aztec ladder was a pine log peeled of bark, about 10 inches in diameter at the bottom tapering to 6 inches at the top. Where the tree branches sprouted slanting downward as the tree had grown, the miners had shaped each end nub to be used as handholds and footholds. On inspection, we identified the etched markings made by the obsidian cutting tools visible in the wood. "I bet the Aztec miners used obsidian biface axes and scrapers to make this," Stalker observed with experienced conviction. "It never occurred to me this was a ladder," Jack admitted sheepishly, conceding he should have guessed the purpose of the log on his own. "I keep trying to teach you that ancient cultures didn't do things the way we do them today," Stalker chided. "Stop seeing through the eyes of Western culture and try to conceptualize the purpose of an artifact based on its potential function in an alternate primitive context." "I'll try to remember that," Jack responded awkwardly before marveling. "You're right, of course. I have this stereotype about a ladder being 2 poles supporting step rungs, and my dogmatic fixation on that design kept me from seeing this log as a ladder." "I know it can be a hard concept to grasp, dude," Stalker conceded. "We archaeologists have to deal with things like this all the time." From the entrance, the passage descended at a 45-degree gradient. The floor beneath our feet consisted of a collection of loose obsidian flakes and fragments of various sizes and shapes, which tinkled, fractured, and pinged like shattered glass with each step we took. "It sounds like we're walking on broken glass," Jack remarked as he placed one foot before the other to descend the slippery slope. "We are walking on glass, volcanic glass that is," Stalker corrected. "How true," Jack admitted as he hesitantly stepped down the slope. The single 16-foot wide passage descended to the northeast for about 70 feet. Ceiling heights along the southeastern side of the tunnel were 6 feet, and then increased to 8 feet before dropping to 5 feet at the end of the chamber. Ledges of various heights lined the wall on our left, obviously formed by the miners when they removed the obsidian in rectangular blocks, much of which remained piled in stacks, apparently still awaiting the return of Aztec porters to transport them all to the surface. "Look at all these blocks," Jack marveled. "Why would the miners go to the trouble of mining so many blocks, and then leave them here? Maybe something happened to interrupt them before they could haul them from the mine." Stalker mused, examining some of the rectangular blocks as he searched for an explanation. If they'd been attacked and killed, their attackers would have taken the obsidian as spoils of war. But since the blocks are still here, it makes me think they left unexpectedly. Would the Spanish conquistadors' conquest of the Aztec Empire qualify as unexpected? Jack proposed after a thoughtful pause. "Quite possibly," Stalker replied pensively, a few moments before continuing. "Maybe the miners got a call to return home to defend against Cortez? It's also possible when the porters returned for the blocks, they passed smallpox to the miners who immediately became sick and died. We haven't seen any human remains in here," Jack reminded him. "We haven't looked," Stalker retorted. "But from now on, we will. I suspect the miners passed blocks along a human chain to transfer them out of the mine," Stalker ventured reasonably. "Remember how the Ejido miners we saw at Sierra de los Navajas formed a human conveyor to move the obsidian nodules they mined to their pickup trucks?" There was so much to examine in the chamber, it was difficult to know where to begin. Lifting one of the obsidian blocks with some effort, Stalker remarked, "These obsidian nodules are surprisingly heavy." "Umph," Jack grunted after lifting the same block. "I can't imagine carrying these out of here, let alone the 150 miles to Tenochtitlan. Walking along the mine tunnel, we marveled at the wealth of obsidian. The ceiling of the chamber appeared similar to the web of crystals found in a rock geode, with the facets, lattices, and trigonal prisms assembled in a hodgepodge of glass protrusions left behind when miners fractured, flaked and fragmented the obsidian to increase the headroom. Near the middle of the chamber where the ceiling was highest, we explored a talus leading to an indentation cut into the obsidian and found a percussion stone the miners left behind. This would be the only stone tool we found in the mines, although we did find another hammer stone on the Sierra de los Navajas, or the Mountain of the Knives. On further inspection southeast of the entrance shaft, we noted an inclined talus leading to a shelf with a low-ceilinged circular crawlway tunneling into the obsidian. Based on conchoidal fractured fluting scarring the walls, ceiling, and floor of the tube, it appeared miners had literally napped the cavity into the flow. As a longtime spelunker, Jack did not hesitate to wiggle into the tight opening and belly crawl forward, while taking compass readings at each turn. The tunnel continued with little change for roughly 60 feet on an easterly course. Unfortunately, the height and width of the passage rarely exceeded 2 feet. So when it ended in an egg-shaped room 8 feet by 12 feet in size, he was relieved because it allowed him to turn around rather than have to back out of the tight crawlway. Apparently, when the miners removed blocks of obsidian from the walls above the ledge, they exposed an unusual obsidian formation with a syrupy appearance. This odd flow of smooth obsidian looked like black ice frozen in time by some volcanic process. Truly, it looked as if during an eruption the seething and roiling magma had cast, smelted and fired a mold in the molten volcanic glass constituents to allow them effectively to capture and imprint the liquidity of the lava flow as it cooled. Perhaps, whenever this syrupy obsidian formation was encountered, it prevented the miners from tunneling any further. Stalker mused. Because it seems they stopped excavating wherever it appears. You might be right. Quite possibly, it might not fracture the same as the standard obsidian? Jack suggested, looking for an explanation. Who knows anything about mining obsidian these days? Stalker responded rhetorically, as it was unlikely we would ever find an answer. I don't know why, but I have a feeling this syrupy obsidian would shatter if hit with force, like safety glass in a car window. Jack reflected. It might have to do with the composition, or quality, of the obsidian. What makes you say that? Stalker persisted perplexed. From what we've seen so far, I wonder if some obsidian composites will not support tunneling. And anything but a small crawlway, or a low passageway, might cave in. Jack inferred absorbedly. So the miners knew to avoid this form of obsidian? Stalker probed. Over the years I've visited several abandoned Colorado mines boring into solid rock, with shoring beams supporting some sections, but not others. Jack clarified. To my inexperienced eye, the walls in the shored sections looked the same as the walls in the sections not shored. But clearly there must have been differences, because miners felt it necessary to shore up only some of the sections. Having been underground for more than 3 hours, with 2 more mines yet to explore, we decided to return to the surface. However, as soon as we arrived at the entrance shaft, Stalker abruptly stopped in his tracks. Have you noticed the difference between the obsidian in the entrance shaft and the obsidian in the walls in the lower excavation? Stalker queried while beginning to meticulously examine the shaft wall. No, what do you see? Jack responded with heightened curiosity. The obsidian in the shaft displays a dull surface cortex like the exposed and weathered nodules we saw lying on the surface of the Sierra de los Navajas ridge near Pachuca. Stalker remarked perceptively. But the obsidian in both the crawl and the walls where the blocks were mined is glassy and shiny, as if the outer decortication flakes were removed. And? Jack prodded, suspecting he should have deduced the answer. It means the shaft and the tunnel were likely mined at different times on the geochronological age scale. Stalker explained. Even though the Aztec miners haven't been in this mine for at least 500 years, the shiny obsidian hasn't been exposed to the air long enough to develop a dull cortex indicating advanced age. Yes. I see what you mean. Jack granted animatedly. It suggests the Aztec could not have mined this shaft, because they only ruled in Mesoamerica for a few hundred years, or so. Stalker added informatively. Accordingly, a much older culture must have originally mined this shaft, as well as the top section of the descending passageway. So then the Aztec reopened shafts and tunnels mined a few centuries earlier by another culture or civilization. Jack inferred animatedly. Maybe even millennia earlier. The archaeologist revealed excitedly before adding provocatively. The dissimilar mining methods employed by both groups of miners are significant as well. Pre-Columbian cultures characteristically used shaft mining to extract volcanic glass from an obsidian flow, while horizontal tunneling like we find here in the Pico de Orizaba mines is all but unheard of, at least in my experience. Do you have any indication which culture could have excavated this original shaft? Jack queried eagerly. I have no clue. Stalker regrettably replied. None of the pottery experts we consulted last year could identify anything but the Aztec shards we found on the surface of our test pit. This was the first time Jack realized that an archaeologist needed not only to be a scientist and a historian, he or she needed to be a detective as well. Archaeologists must deduce a logical reconstruction of the past based on the clues uncovered, which allow for observable inconsistencies. We elected to use the Aztec ladder to ascend the entrance shaft. Stalker ascended first, and easily climbed the artifact using the rope as a safety line. Since the ladder ended short of the rim, he had to free climb the last 6 feet of the shaft. Clearly, this was something the miners did daily, so it was no surprise to Stalker when he located the handholds and footholds snapped into the wall of the shaft, perfectly placed for him to use on his ascent. The last hand to use these handholds belonged to an Aztec miner. The archaeologist observed with reverential profundity. After he cleared the rim of the shaft, Jack scurried up the ladder. Without wasting any time, we gathered our gear and moved northeast to the mine just north of Talus number 5. The entrance drop was nearly 15 feet, a 6-foot vertical descent to a 9-foot-high mound of earth, obsidian and rock piled on the otherwise level floor of the chamber. Knowing what to expect, without too much difficulty we used the hand and footholds carved by the miners long ago to descend to the talus pile. The large room was empty save for a single stack of rectangular obsidian blocks similar to the ones we had discovered in the Talus number 2 mine. Peculiarly, the many depressions in the perimeter walls of the circular chamber suggested the miners aborted every attempt to create more tunnels into the obsidian flow. Looking for reasons for their failure, and more perceptive after our earlier experiences, we noticed the white veins layering the chamber's obsidian walls. This white stuff is nothing more than a compacted powder. Jack noted after he scraped a vein with the point of his knife and watched the substance readily crumble. Since miners didn't tunnel into it, it must be bad for knapping. Stalker agreed. It may even be dangerous or unreliable for tunneling. Maybe it's an ash left from a combustible material mixed into the soil when lava flowed through as the obsidian formed. Jack pondered. It had not occurred to us until then, obsidian deposits were not always pure. Pre-Columbians probably sought out only the very purest of obsidian deposits, formed when the magma heated the homogeneous sandy soils to form the unalloyed volcanic glass. But that did not mean deposits of adulterated obsidian could not form as well, mixed or layered with foreign substances. From the moment we first entered the mine, we heard a familiar sound we should have recognized. But given our high elevation on an active volcano, we failed to identify it for what it truly was. However, as we moved towards the pile of obsidian blocks, the noise became more apparent. And by staring intently into the gloom, Jack finally noticed a distinctive movement on the obsidian floor to provide him the requisite clue to ascertain the source of the sound. "Hold up," Jack warned. "There's a rattlesnake over there." Stalker stopped, and immediately stood motionless. And to give him credit, he did not freak out. On numerous occasions when Jack had encountered venomous snakes, in his experience more often than not, the mere warning of a rattlesnake's proximity sends people into a fearful frenzy, which was why he kept his tone casual when voicing his warning. We made a careful circuit of the chamber to verify none of the aborted tunnels led to a passage. But as we suspected, the miners stopped work wherever they came across the powdery white veins in the obsidian. We did find a room containing a pool of water, suggesting a crack to the surface provided a channel for rainwater or snowmelt to enter the mine. Peering upwards at just the right angle in the back of the room, we saw a slit of daylight in a crack clogged with roots. Only 18 inches of soil covered a 2-foot shell of obsidian beyond the chamber's ceiling. "Look at this!" Stalker exclaimed in the next abandoned passage we found, when he lifted a 6-foot wooden pole sharpened at the narrow end. "What is it?" Jack asked, inspecting his discovery. "I believe it's a tool, a lever used by Aztec miners to pry rectangular blocks of obsidian from the walls," Stalker avowed. "It's an important find, perhaps the only such Aztec tool ever discovered." On closer inspection, the nubs of a pair of branches protruded from the pole at right angles, roughly 16 inches and 24 inches from the sharpened end. Archimedes may not have been Mesoamerican, but the Aztec miners had to be aware of the principle of the fulcrum and lever, since it would not take much work experience for any miner who used such a tool to figure out the efficacy of the method. Both knobs would make excellent built-in fulcrums when a miner inserted the sharpened tip of the lever into a crack in the obsidian wall. And plainly, the scraped and frayed wood between the first knob and the pole's tip indicated how the tool had been used. "Take a picture of me holding this lever," Stalker said as he removed his helmet and lamp. Since he had mostly avoided being in the photographs thus far, this had to be an important find. Crouching in front of the obsidian wall, he pantomimed how a miner might have once used the tool. We examined the stacked quadrilateral obsidian blocks left behind by the miners. On one flawless block measuring around 20 by 10 by 6 inches in size, the 6 faultless glassy faces juxtaposed at perfect right angles. Jack took a photograph of Stalker sitting on a mound of unmined white-veined obsidian while holding the rectangular block between his hands. Just think about the knowledge these miners must have had to be able to knap obsidian into these perfect geometric shapes using nothing but a percussion stone, Jack remarked in fascination. With a sizable portion of the economy of their empire based on crafted obsidian objects, I suspect the Aztec knew everything there is to know about shaping the volcanic glass, Stalker stated. "They were masters of a lost art we barely understand today." Sadly, we saw little else of note in the mine except for a small colony of pipistrelle bats hanging from the ceiling in a dark crevice. After climbing out of the mine, we found the sun had moved high in the midday sky. And it took a few minutes for our eyes to adjust to the brightness. The final obsidian mine of the 3 we discovered the day before lay less than the length of a football field across talus number 6 to the west. So we carefully picked our way across the fragments until reaching the entrance. Until they breached the obsidian flow, to prevent the 3-foot-high horizontal tunnel through the loose earth from collapsing, the Aztec miners had shored the walls of the entrance to the talus number 7 mine with stacked fieldstone collected from the ridge slope. As the vertical drop into the mine was only about 6 feet to the top of a steep talus, Jack did not bother to rig a climbing rope this time. The entrance room totaled 14 feet in height from the base of the talus to the ceiling dome above, but sloped to only about 4 feet at the northeast end of the 16-foot-long chamber. As before, the obsidian walls of the entrance shaft displayed the dull and pitted surface cortex of an older excavation predating the Aztec. The passage continued towards the northwest through a narrow crevice canted along a left-to-right gradient with no more than 3 feet of clearance at the highest point. However, the 8-foot-wide passageway pinched tight at both ends, allowing us only 2 feet of usable width as we had no choice but to crawl on hands and knees. Almost immediately the tunnel branched, with the steeply canted passageway continuing towards the northwest, while a 4-foot-wide tunnel diverged to the southwest. The floor of the canted passage was flat, impossible for the Aztec miners to have napped. So, it must be a natural geological formation, a plate formed when the pool of newly molten volcanic glass cooled. This was a startling discovery, since it suggested the miners had tunneled into a natural cavity in the obsidian flow where the obsidian floor plate had at some point in geological time broken off and tipped diagonally. We decided to explore the left passage first because it offered us more headroom, as well as a level floor to walk on. Since the obsidian here was glassy and shiny, we assumed the Aztec mined it. After pinching to 3 feet, the passage widened as it turned west. Quickly, we came to a 4-foot sloping drop-off, gaining us another foot of headroom, and a few feet later it dropped again to give us 5 feet of clearance. Here the tunnel intersected a narrow crawl leading to a nearly vertical crevasse where the broken obsidian plate angled even more precipitously to form an impassable wedge 14 feet below. Backtracking to the last juncture, we followed the main passage turning north, and after a pair of drops, it ended in a small chamber with a 6-foot-high ceiling. Retracing our steps once again, this time back to the canted obsidian plate going deeper into the ridge, the passage forced us to crawl on our stomachs as the ceiling dropped to 2 feet of clearance. The left-to-right cant of the obsidian plate beneath our bellies made it hard to keep from sliding to the right to wedge where the floor and ceiling pinched together. The ceiling slot in the canted crawlway revealed the shiny obsidian of a more recent excavation where the Aztec miners presumably tried to nap out extra headroom. Moments later, we arrived at the ledge where the obsidian plate had broken and tilted. The crawlway remained arduous, but at least the level floor kept us from sliding into the wedge on our right. Abruptly the passageway ended in a chamber with a high ceiling. The lower 6 feet of a broken Aztec ladder rested against the northwest wall below a much higher passage sloping upwards another 4 feet to connect to a tunnel mine to the north. Here's another ladder, or at least what's left of one. Come take a look, Jack urged after moving aside to allow Stalker to enter the small chamber to inspect the artifact. It isn't in the best of shape, Stalker noted as he studied the broken sections. I'm afraid it might break again if we attempted to climb it. Before it fractured into 3 pieces, it must have been over 14 feet long when the miners dragged it back here through the canted crawl. Let me see if I can chimney up the wall and avoid the ladder, Jack said without waiting for a reply. With his back braced against one wall and his legs jackknifed horizontally with his feet on the opposing wall, he inched upwards to circumvent the wooden artifact until he could chimney to a higher passage. Luckily, the miners had napped the obsidian at his back more or less smooth, so there were few protrusions to poke him. Nice job, Stalker praised as Jack reached the ledge 10 feet above. Now it's your turn, Terry, Jack admonished. Emulating Jack's actions, Stalker chimneyed around the ladder and reached the higher tunnel as well, the 4-foot ceiling therein making it easy to walk bent over at the waist for the first portion of the passage. Then the tunnel twisted 90 degrees to the northeast to intersect a larger passage where we could stand upright. The center slot of this new tunnel provided 7 feet of head clearance, with taluses to both the left and right sloping upwards to narrow shelves filled with stacks of obsidian blocks. The volcanic glass here was shiny, so the Aztec must have worked this section of the mine as well. Just look at all the blocks, Stalker remarked in awe, as he tried climbing the talus of loose debitage created when miners napped the obsidian into rectangular shapes. For each step taken upward, he slid 3/4 of a step backward as the loose flakes slid under his boots. Then when he finally reached the ledge, he began examining the large collection of mined blocks. This is high-quality obsidian. No wonder miners excavated it, he surmised as his fingers traced the edges of the blocks on the top of the stack. They must have known about the superior quality of this pocket. And again, everything they mined they left behind, Jack noted, shaking his head in mystification. Finishing our examination of the blocks, we resumed exploring the tunnel heading northeast. And after a short drop, we entered a 10-foot-high room with alcoves carved high and low along the napped walls. Here the mine proved a veritable warren of rooms and passages, with the main tunnel ending in a notch with a ledge 5 feet up a wall. Miners carved a passage northwest, 6 feet above the floor turning left to create an obsidian bridge over a lower tunnel dropping into a circular chamber. This is the source of the high-quality obsidian, Stalker remarked, examining obsidian walls matching the quality of the stacked blocks. All the walls and ceilings in this portion of the mine were identical, with the crystal clusters in the center of a geode with angular black glass prisms reflecting the light of our carbide lamps from tens of thousands of sparkling angles and surfaces. The overall effect was exactly like looking through a powerful telescope into the heart of the Milky Way, as if a spatial shift had transported us to an enclosed location under the night sky. Yet in reality, we were underground in an Aztec obsidian mine lost for the last 500 years, cut into a volcanic flow formed untold ages past by a major eruption of the largest volcano on the continent. This chamber is truly awe-inspiring, Jack revered, humbled by the natural beauty surrounding them, after which, Stalker responded with a brief glance of accord as he silently reveled in the chamber's splendor. So far, we had neither disturbed nor taken anything from the mines. And sitting there in this holy chamber, if the word holy can be used to identify what is most worthy of our spiritual respect and devotion, we made a pact based on our mutual respect for the obsidian mines. As much as I'd like to take a sample or two out of these mines, I feel compelled to leave everything we've discovered exactly where we found it, Stalker admitted when he finally broke the silence. I know exactly what you mean, Jack voluntarily agreed. Do you remember our caving club's policy statement back in college, borrowed from the National Speleological Society? Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints, Stalker replied after a moment of recollection. I think this should be our policy here in the obsidian mines as well, Jack proposed with sincerity. Okay, Stalker agreed with finality. If you're into it, then so am I. For several minutes, we absorbed the ambience of the distinctive environs without talking. Awe-inspiring experiences such as this rarely if ever happen in one's lifetime. And it is wise to live in the moment when the vagaries of entropy deign to allow us to experience one in actuality. We silently memorized everything in contact with our five senses, the unimaginable beauty caressing our eyes, the silence of our glassy entombment embracing our ears, the smooth sensual sharpness of the angles in the walls, and the scent and taste of antiquity, transcending us into the realm of the historical, the mystical, and the divine. Abruptly Jack recalled the words of the I Ching hexagram he cast the day after we arrived in Pachuca. The reading presaged heaven within the mountain points to hidden treasures. And this starry chamber of obsidian was the hidden treasure it foretold. Truly, heaven within the mountain. Though we would only take pictures, Jack wondered if even that was too much of an imposition on the volcano. Recalling the 1948 film, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, when Dobbs, Curtin and Howard decided to leave their treasure with the mountain, the latter stated profoundly. We've wounded this mountain. It's our duty to close her wounds. It's the least we can do to show gratitude for the wealth she's given us. So, when Jack contemplated his placement in space and time within an obsidian chamber of existential wealth and immeasurable wonderment, hidden beneath the slopes of the highest volcano in North America, in awe he breathed a profound prayer. A quotation from John Nehart's book Black Elk Speaks, attributed to the Oglala Sioux medicine man and shaman. It is a good day to die. Hoka hey, he sang, prompting Stalker to nod his head in agreement, in this instance, meaning life is so good that if he died today, he would not feel he had missed anything it offers. After a brief hesitation to contemplate his environs, Stalker slowly nodded his head in silent agreement. And after exiting the obsidian mine, on the morrow we spent the next few days mapping the three mines. The task of surveying the mines was not particularly difficult, just methodical. Using a compass, the 100-foot tape, and graph paper on a clipboard, we systematically and serially began mapping all three mines. Starting at each entrance, Jack took a compass reading and wrote it into the notebook as he sketched a rough drawing of the tunnel. Then Stalker took the end of the tape to the opposite wall along the compass heading, and Jack wrote the measurement into an index table. Next, we measured the perpendicular passage widths and vertical heights between the points on the compass line, and Jack marked down the distances and drew in the connected walls to scale. With each turn of the passage, we repeated the process on a new compass heading. And ever so slowly, Jack gradually filled in the map until we accounted for every tunnel, shaft and alcove in each of the three obsidian mines we discovered. To determine the angle of slopes and passages with elevation changes, Jack used the attached protractor on the compass. And several times, he made cross-sectional sketches of the shafts and unusual vertical shifts in the passageways, as well as notations on the exact locations of ladders, tools, and stacks of obsidian blocks the miners left behind. In the Talus No. 2 mine, the low and narrow 60-foot crawlway napped into the obsidian flow on an easterly heading was a literal pain to map. In the tight confines of the 2-foot-wide tube, it was impossible to turn around, and even trying to change position to take a measurement resulted in bruises from the many sharp protrusions in the obsidian walls and ceiling, or a prick or slice from one of the loose flakes of volcanic glass strewn across the floor. And because we kept sliding to the lower end where the obsidian floor plate canted to the right, the Talus No. 7 mine proved difficult to map. But with those exceptions, the task of surveying the mines was relatively uneventful. Incredibly, the Talus No. 7 mine mapped to 270 feet of new, old, and ostensibly natural tunnels. Of course, we had to deal with the rattlesnake in the Talus No. 5 mine, which inevitably followed us everywhere we went. The mostly circular chamber did not make for much of a map, however. And after finishing, we questioned why we even bothered to waste our time. In all, it took us 3 days to complete our survey of the mines, allowing us one free day before we were scheduled to return to Omicalco El Cajon. The following morning, we broke camp in anticipation of Ciro Tinclay's return. Jack and Stalker felt a bittersweet sadness about leaving the obsidian mines, as well as our camp on the quiescent volcano. On the one hand, we sadly knew the spiritual highs produced by our explorations here, at so remote an extent of reality, would dissipate and disappear once we returned to civilization. But on the other hand, we knew those highs were doomed to fade even if we remained. For without the existential pursuit of our expeditionary objectives to give being here meaning, our accustomed worldview would re-establish its sway upon our awareness anyway. Embracing life whenever reality offers us its wonders to experience and enjoy, and letting go without regret when that time has passed, is the only way to preserve the memory of an experiential event, pure and untainted. Ciro and his sons arrived before noon with the horses and burros. And in a mirror image of 8 days earlier, they loaded our gear and we descended Pico de Orizaba back to the tiny hamlet of Omicalco El Cajon. Our descent down the volcano proved uneventful, and none of our company had opportunity to speak among themselves, each presumably wrapped up in his or her own thoughts and musings. Barbara and Frank rode the horses in single file all the way to Omicalco El Cajon, which made it impossible for them to speak to anyone. While Stalker walked at the head of our column beside laconic Ciro Tinclay. Jack took up the rear of our slow-moving convoy. Due to the joyful purpose his time there provided him and the spiritual connection he felt with the mountain and the mines, he felt unexpectedly reticent and taciturn about his departure, which was now temporarily a part of his past, likely never to be experienced again. While he would never reclaim that once-in-a-lifetime feeling, he nevertheless catches glimpses of it whenever he hikes above 13,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies today. The end.